During the summer of 1888, Dry Creek, Kansas, had a view that went on forever. Wheat fields stretched out like a golden sea, with only windmills, fences, and a few wooden homes to break up the view. In this place, people trusted their friends whose families had lived on this land for generations and worked hard. They also believed in the steady rhythm of the seasons. The Whitlock family name had been one of the best known in the county for almost 10 years. People who didn't want to live there called their farm the Whitlock Farm. It is often talked about with joy in Sunday sermons and at the county fair every year. People called Harland Whitlock the man who gave lost children a home. His wife Miriam was known for her quiet, steady care in the kitchen and dormitory. Their daughters, Prudence and Cora, were seen as patient teachers who taught the orphans how important it is to do honest work. In July of that year, no one thought the storm would take away the first layer of that carefully built picture. The wind came in the middle of the night and tore across the fields, strong enough to shake windows and knock fence posts off their bases. A broken branch, flooded furrows, and a collapsed animal shed at the northern edge of the Whitlock farm were all that were left behind when the clouds broke up in the morning. A building that had been said to be empty for a long time was said to have gray paint and doors that hung free from the building. But now the storm had torn up some of the ground below. There was the corner of a small leather shoe in the flow as it moved through. Fields. The first person to see it was a hand from a nearby farm. He took a step closer and saw other things stuck in the moving mud. An animal-shaped doll with button eyes. The torn cover of a book for kids on how to write. By the middle of the morning, the town's general shop had heard about it. People talked quietly about the flour sacks and fabric bolts that were hidden under an empty shed on a farm that said it sent its kids to loving homes. They didn't understand why these things were there. There were no replies yet. What the Whitlock said. In order to protect its pride, the county didn't ask as many questions as it should have. One stranger, who came to Dry Creek a week later, saw the picture of a shoe in the mud and thought it was the first part of a tight lie. Harland Whitlock was the type of person who seemed to fill every room he walked into. Tall and wide from working with horses and plows for decades. Without speaking, his presence took over the room. His once black hair was now streaked with gray, and the look in his eyes told me. The calm certainty of someone who is used to having people believe what they say. People in Dry Creek say that Harland always kept his word. Miriam Whitlock was shorter than him, but she didn't have as much power as he did. She was short and had her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Most of the time she wore an apron, and her sleeves were rolled up to the elbow. Her face almost never told you anything. Be polite to guests, quick with the kids, and quiet in public places. If Harland was the Whitlock name's voice, Miriam was. It has a stiff back. Prudence was their older daughter. She was 27 years old and held herself like a boss. She took short, deliberate steps, and her words and eyes were so sharp that they could cut. In the fields, she watched as rows of kids planted, pulled weeds, and harvested with the same level of speed that she would expect from paid farmhands. People in the town called her Miss Prue, but few said it without feeling nervous. Cora, who was 23 years old and younger, seemed to be the softer one. She smiled softly at people who came to visit. Her voice was smooth and warm. She often went with her mother to town to buy supplies and enjoyed talking with store owners. She was rarely seen in the fields, though. From what she said, she worked with kids who were too sick, too small, or too weak to keep up in the summer heat. She said those kids needed a calmer spot to get stronger. This sharing of work was what gave the Whitlock farm its unique flow. It was easy to see the bigger, healthy kids working with Prudence watching them, in line for meals and on Sundays singing hymns. The others, the ones that Cora was taking care of, were hidden. In Dry Creek, no one could say for sure where they stayed or what they did during the day. But because the Whitlock had a good name, people didn't ask those kinds of questions. People in the county thought it was valuable to do good things, and their track record of matching kids with farm families all over the territories was seen as an unbroken string of wins. And if some of those kids were never seen in town again, well, that was the country way. At this point, there was no doubt about the Whitlock's status. As the summer of 1888 went on, though, things were about to change. Evan Hart got to Dry Creek on a train going west in the second week of August, 1888. Her leather satchel was full of camera plates, and her notebook was full of shorthand notes and an order from the Wichita Gazette. Write down the Whitlock farm for the unwanted as a great example of rural kindness. She could see from the train station. I can already see the endless prairie, with its haystacks and windmills, spread out in front of me against a clear blue sky. The town itself was a neat collection of buildings with fake fronts. There was a general store, a feed supplier, a one-room schoolhouse, and a simple church with a bell tower that sparkled in the sun. Evelyn had written about mining towns, homesteads that were destroyed by drought, and traveling medicine shows before, but this was her first job that involved an orphanage. The editor of the Gazette had great things to say about the Whitlocks, took in kids that no one else wanted, taught them how to trade, and then sent them off to better lives. He told the story to show people that things aren't always bad in the world. She met Harlan Whitlock at the front gate of the farm. He had his hat on and a strong handshake. "Welcome to Hollow Bend," he said, pointing out to the wide area of wheat fields. "We think that you should show, not just tell. You'll see what good work looks like for yourself." Prudence was close behind, and her face showed that she was polite, but careful. She led Evelyn down the main dirt road and pointed out the work groups. Some were kids with wide-brimmed hats who were bent over neat rows of corn, and others were driving a team of mules to carry a wagon full of sacks to the grain house. Every move had a reason, and every voice was quiet. Cora came out from the direction of the main house and emerged at the far end of the yard. She wore a light cotton dress, and her smile was big enough to make the scene seem kinder. "The little ones are about to be brought in for rest," she said. "You'll meet them another day when they're feeling better." Evelyn raised her camera to take a picture of the farmyard's neatness when she saw a skinny, sunburned little boy stop what he was doing to look at the northern sheds. Before Prudence's sharp voice told him to go back to his row, he looked at a low, weathered shed for a while. Evelyn had been asked to record a picture of hard work and care, but as I stood there and watched the sun shine on the tin roof of, she thought her lens might be on something much more complex than that northern shed. In the evening, Evelyn went into Dry Creek's general shop and said she needed to buy extra lamp oil and chemicals for photography. The general store was more than just a place to buy and sell things in these kinds of towns. It's where news was measured out with flour and sugar. While Mrs. Hazel Boone, the shop owner, wrapped her items in brown paper, Evelyn brought up the Whitlock farm without meaning to. Hazel's face got just a little tighter. "They stick too," she said in a lower voice. "Trust yourselves, Yen. You shouldn't buy much here besides bread, coffee, salt, and flour. Little kids should never wear shoes. Don't dress for small clothes. Strange for a place with lots of kids." The miller, Jonas Derry, who was leaning against the bar, added his own piece. "I once saw Miss Prudence loading up lime down by the freight station. Also, a big order, paid cash. It was taken right to their north pens. That much isn't needed unless you're hiding or whitewashing something." His voice was weak. "Turn off." It was written down in Evelyn's notebook. Lime, no buying for kids, and supplies going straight to the buildings in the north. She chose to see how open the Whitlock was the next morning. She asked Harland over breakfast if she could take pictures of the little one's quarantine so that her readers could see all the different things that the farm did. Harland smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "They're fragile," he told her. "We keep them quiet, away from the bustle. You'll meet them when they're ready." After that, Evelyn saw Cora running quickly along the fence line toward the tree wood beyond the northern shed while she was taking pictures of the greenhouse. She wore something over her shoulder. It was a long, thin bundle made of fabric. Her grip was tight, but it was light enough for her to carry by herself. She had her eyes fixed straight ahead. Evelyn thought about that picture for a long time after she processed her film that night in the room she rented above the feed store. On paper, the Whitlock farm looked great, clean, and... She worked hard on her photos, but she couldn't stop thinking about what she hadn't seen. The sounds of kids laughing, a playground, and any sign of people who were too weak to work in the field. Behind the Whitlock's politeness and strict routines, something wasn't adding up, and Evelyn began to think that the solutions might be in that forbidden northern shed. After 2 nights, Evelyn stayed away from the main track and climbed the long dirt road to the edge of the Whitlock farm. The air in August was thick, with the smell of fresh-cut hay. The only light came from a thin crescent moon and the lamp she was carrying, which had a low flame. She carefully picked her viewing point, a low ridge beyond the split-rail fence that gave her a view of the northern shed. From this point of view, the main house of the farm was a dark outline against the sky, its windows dark. The shed, on the other hand, was hidden in the shade by a stand of wind-twisted cottonwoods. Nothing moved for an hour. There were crickets. The wind spoke to the wheat. Then there was a dim glow coming from inside the shed, and 2 people came out from the direction of the house. Evelyn could see Prudence's quick steps and Cora's smaller body keeping up even from this far away. They pushed a wooden handcart together. One thing, a long, tightly wrapped bundle, was in the cart. Its shape was too rigid to be just tools or materials. Cora carried a lantern. The light from it moved slowly across the road. Prudence kept her hands on the cart and leaned her head forward as if to push it forward. Faster. They went inside the shed when they got there. As Evelyn looked through a crack in the warped wall, she saw things moving. There is a mechanical clank and the muffled sound of wood scraping against dirt. The shadows move back and forth. Prudence came back out after a while, this time carrying a spade over one shoulder. She walked across the yard to the grove beyond the shed and disappeared into the darkness between the trees. Cora stayed inside, and the light from her lanterns shook against the boards. Evelyn listened while she held her breath. The night, the sound of a shovel hitting the ground, the soft hiss of grass being shook up, and words that were too faint to be heard were all carried in strange ways. The cart was empty when Prudence came back. The 2 women locked the shed door, put out the lantern, and went back to the house. She hid until it got dark again in the yard. Her heart beat faster as she walked back toward the town. It wasn't because she was scared, but because she was sure. It wasn't part of what was going on in that northern shed. Any charity that the newspaper should praise. When Evelyn got to Dry Creek the next morning, she took the early freight wagon with the camera plates she had exposed the night before in her bag. Even though the pictures hadn't been processed yet, she knew what they showed. In the northern shed, the forms of Prudence and Cora, the handcart, and that bundle fade away. The sheriff's office is in a small room between the blacksmith shop and the telegraph station. She went straight there. Amos Trumbull, the sheriff, was working at his desk and going through a stack of wanted posters. He was big, and his hair was getting thinner. He had a smooth draw that could calm people down in a bar. He gave Evelyn a polite nod when she introduced herself and listed her qualifications. But when she talked about the Whitlock farm, he changed how he looked. "The Whitlocks," he replied, slouching in his chair. They've done more good for this county than most folks combined. You're not here to stir trouble, are you?" Evelyn spoke in a low voice. "I've seen things that don't fit the story I was sent to tell." She talked about the wagon, the bundle, the trip to the shed late at night, and how the so-called gentle children were not seen by anyone. Trumbull let out a sigh and rubbed his jaw. "Miss Hart Harland Whitlock is on the board of the church. Miriam is in charge of the ladies' charity group. Half of the gift lists in the county have Prudence's name on them. You want me to put my badge up against Dry Creek's most trusted family, based on the dark shadows you saw?" Evelyn did not move. She took one of the still-wrapped glass plates out of her bag and slid it toward him. "You'll see it's more than shadows when I come back to these. But you might miss the kids who can't walk at all if you wait for proof to come through your front door." For a long time, the sheriff looked at her and tapped his thumb on the desk edge. He ended by saying, "If we do this, we do it my way. Peaceful. Do not give orders unless we have to. We have to go see them for county business, and you are going with me as my photographer. You will be able to see what's there." Even though Evelyn didn't want it to be the final blow, it was a hole in the wall. She also knew that once a crack showed up, the rest of the truth would find its way through. The next day, Sheriff Trumbull and Evelyn rode out to the Whitlock farm. There was a gray mist in the air over the wheat fields. He held on to his coat was buttoned up against the rain, and his handgun was holstered but close by. Evelyn carried her camera case and a small paper with her. She was thinking about the angle she would want to get if she got the chance to take pictures. He opened the door before they could knock, like he was keeping an eye on the road. His big frame filled the doorway, and his face showed a careful mix of happiness and tiredness. He asked the sheriff, "Sheriff, why are you out this early?" "Normal business for the county," Trumbull answered, crossing the threshold without being asked. "We wanted to take a look and see how things are going. A picture will be taken for the record by Miss Hart here." Miriam came out of the kitchen with a folded towel to wipe her hands on. When Prudence came out of the hallway, her eyes were sharp and careful. All but Cora were not there. The sheriff started by asking nicely about the harvest, the amount of kids living on the farm, and those who had just been placed. Harland answered calmly, but his eyes kept moving back and forth, slowly toward Prudence, as if to see how she would react. Evan asked if they could check out the classes. Prudence led the way, and her boots squeaked on the worn-out floors. They walked into a room that was full of wooden desks, and every one of them was filled by a child. 16 of the older boys and girls were sitting stiffly with their eyes down and their hands folded. The air was still and heavy. Evelyn looked at each face and noticed how their skin was smooth and the light marks on the ends of their shirts that looked like bruises. Police Officer Trumbull knelt next to a child. At the end of the line. It was a soft question. "What's your name, son?" The boy opened his mouth to talk, but Prudence put her hands on the back of his chair before he could. The boy's eyes went down and his lips shut, but he didn't say anything. A girl with dark hair looked at Evelyn from the far corner. For a split second, her eyes held a quiet, pleading look. Then she turned her head away too. As they walked out of the room, Evelyn could feel the weight of those words following her down the hall. The kids knew what was going on at the Whitlock farm, but they were too scared to say it out loud. Evelyn had been getting ready for this. As she and Sheriff Trumbull walked back into the front hall, she stopped and rubbed her coat pocket. She looked at Harland and said, "I think I left my lens cloth in the classroom." "May I please get it?" Miriam asked, before Harland could answer. She stepped forward with the towel still in her hand. "I'll take her," she said quickly. "The police and you can." It was quiet as they walked down the hall. When they got to the classroom, Miriam saw that Evelyn had left the cloth draped over a desk. But she didn't hand it over right away. Instead, She stood there holding it and looking at the worn floorboards. "You're not just here to take pictures, are you?" Miriam asked, in a low voice that was almost a whisper. "I'm here because something is wrong. You know it. I've seen enough to tell me the children are not safe." "It wasn't supposed to be this way," Miriam whispered. "We took them in, gave them work, food, and a roof. Harlan said the ones who couldn't keep up would only suffer out here. He said it was mercy." Her voice broke on the last word, and Evelyn leaned in. "And Prudence, Cora. Prudence keeps the strong ones working. Cora takes care of the rest. Out of sight, always out of sight." Miriam's eyes darted to the doorway and she pressed the cloth into Evelyn's chest. The sound of footsteps in the hall made them both stiffen up, and Prudence's voice rang out, "Mother?" By the time Prudence walked through the door, Miriam's face had gone back to being neutral. Evelyn slipped the cloth into her pocket and forced a polite smile, but she was already thinking over Miriam's half-confession over and over again, knowing that it proved what she had already thought, that the Whitlock family had another side. The farm was being hidden behind locked doors and quiet voices. 2 nights later, Evelyn went back to her vantage point on the low ridge beyond the split-rail fence. The air was cooler now, and a thin wind moved across the wheat fields like a ripple on water. She brought her camera with her, with the shutter set and plates ready, and the lens hooded to hide any reflections of light. At first, the farm was still, with no lanterns and only the swaying shadows of trees. Around midnight, the door to the main house opened. Even though Evelyn couldn't see them, she could tell who they were. Prudence was walking ahead with her short steps, and Cora was following closely with a lantern in her hand. In the middle of the two of them was a wooden handcart with a long, wrapped bundle inside. The fabric was pulled tight and tied at both ends, with a little give in the middle from its own weight. They crossed the yard without saying a word, and the lantern's light cast quicksilver flashes on the wet grass. With a soft squeak, the wooden wheels of the cart moved into the shadow of the northern shed. Evelyn moved her camera to the narrow gap in the warped siding and caught glimpses of Prudence lifting the bundle off the cart and Cora holding the lantern low. The two of them were hunched over what looked like a trap door in the dirt floor. Prudence straightened up and picked up a spade. She walked towards the tree line behind the shed and disappeared into the darkness beneath the cottonwoods. Evelyn heard the heavy rhythmic thud of metal on earth. When Prudence came back, her hands and the spade's blade were filled with dirt. The lantern was turned down, the trapdoor was shut, and the empty cart was rolled back toward the house. Evelyn stayed where she was until it got dark again. Her fingers were sore from holding the camera, but she had what she needed. The silhouettes, the cart, the bundle, and the shed. They were just shadows, but they told a story. It was time for the sheriff to move quickly after seeing Evelyn's developed plates. The blurred but undeniable shapes of the cart, the bundle, and the sheriff's advice to be careful with the spade were enough to convince him that waiting could cost lives. He sent secret telegrams to neighboring counties asking for the loan of deputies he could trust who had no ties to the Whitlocks. 3 days later, just before dawn, 4 riders moved quietly up the road to the sky was a pewter color, and the air was damp and still. Evelyn rode with them, her camera case strapped behind her saddle. She knew this wasn't a stage tour, but a search for the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. They got off the horses near the main house, and fresh cart tracks pressed deep into the dirt led from the back steps to the northern shed. Along the path, the deputies saw some dark stains in the soil that hadn't been heaved away yet. Harlan answered the pounding on the door. While he was at the door, Trumbull walked past him and into the front hall. "Sheriff, this is very strange," he said. "We're here on county business. Everyone stays in sight until we're done. Where are your daughters?" Miriam came out of the kitchen, pale and tight-lipped, and Prudence came out of the side hall, her eyes narrowing when she saw the deputies. Cora was nowhere to be seen. One deputy took the stairs 2 at a time, while another moved toward the front door. After Trumbull led Evelyn to the northern shed, her boots sank a little into the wet ground. As soon as they opened the door, the smell hit her first. Old, earthy, and metallic. In the dim light, Evelyn could see the warped boards, the dirt floor, and, near the back wall, a square shape where the soil was a different color trapdoor. Prudence's sharp, hard voice called out from behind them, "You have no right to be here." But the sheriff was already there. The hinges squeaked as the deputies lifted the iron ring set into the wood. A damp, cold breath rose from below. "Lanterns," Trumbull ordered, and the deputies lowered the light into the darkness. What it revealed would silence even the loudest denials. The light from the lantern spilled down a narrow wooden ladder into a small, cramped room dug into the ground below the shed. Sheriff Trumbull went down first, landing on packed dirt, and Evelyn followed with her camera swinging from its strap. The glass plate of the camera was swinging, holder under her arm. The room was about 20 feet long and half that wide. It was damp and close and smelled like unwashed bodies and mildew. Along the far wall, 14 kids were huddled together in threadbare clothes. Some were so still they looked like they were carved from the shadows, while others shrank back to protect their eyes from the sudden glow of the lanterns. Evelyn's eyes caught on the details. A split lip that had never fully healed, a wrist bound in a dirty strip of cloth, and bare feet. One boy couldn't have been more than 7 years old. His hair was matted and his face was dirty. Trumbull's voice was steady but low. "We're getting you out of here." He gave one deputy his gun and told him to stay at the ladder until all the kids were up. As the first child climbed, Evelyn forced herself to work, focusing, adjusting the light, and taking a picture that would speak louder than any witness. The sharp sound of the shutter clicked cut through the soft shuffle of bare feet. When it got light again, the search grew. Deputies went through the farmhouse, opening trunks and cabinets. In the upstairs classroom, the desks were bolted to the floor and had a clean slate and chalk neatly arranged, but no personal items. In a locked cabinet, they found sets of children's clothes that were all the same size and just worn enough to look like they had been worn. These were costumes for whatever image the Whitlocks needed to present. In Harlan's study, Trumbull found ledgers. There were columns with names, dates, and short-term or long-term notes. Next to some names were small cross arcs, which Evelyn quickly looked through. Each cross arc had a child's name that she had not seen in the fields or the cellar. When the search party got back together in the yard, 14 children had been found and were sitting on blankets from the deputies' saddle packs. Harlan, Miriam, and Prudence stood alone and were being watched. An hour later, Cora was found coming out of the far pasture, her hands and skirts taped. "We're not done," Sheriff Trumbull said, looking back and forth between the children and the family. "Not by half." In the main parlor, where the Whitlocks were being watched, Sheriff Trumbull laid the recovered ledgers out on the dining table. Evelyn put down her camera and leaned in to read the pages. The handwriting was clear, with Prudence's slanted, angular script in some books and Cora's rounder letters in others. Each ledger was organized into neat columns that had the name, date of. Evelyn didn't like the notes column as much as the arrival, status, and notes columns. Some entries had numbers that looked like daily labor tallies, like 10 rows weeded, 3 sacks meal, and harvest team. Others were marked as short-term, but there was no labor record and only a date in the last column, which was often just weeks after arrival. Cora had written softer words like not thriving, too fragile, sleeps often, and kept inside. Prudence's notes were blunt: unfit, remove, and next to. Under one stack of ledgers was a folded piece of heavy paper with Harlan's handwriting on it. It was a rough map of the Whitlock property, with the northern grove marked with a grid and a number at each grid point. One deputy brought in a burlap bag that they had found in the storage loft. Inside were small personal items like a tin soldier missing an arm, a hair ribbon, and a child's Bible with the name Abigail written on the front cover. None of these things had been mentioned in any of the ledgers. Taking a deep breath, Evelyn turned to a previous winner's ledger and saw 3 short-term entries in December that matched the numbers on Harlan's map. "Then we dig," Sheriff Trumbull said. "We check every mark on that map. It's okay if there's nothing. But if there's something," he said, leaving the thought unsaid. Evelyn carefully closed the ledger, as if the paper might fall apart in her hands. She knew that whatever they found in that grove would be the last piece of truth that the Whitlocks had buried, and once it was found, it could never be hidden again. The deputies followed Harlan's hand-drawn map into the northern grove. The cottonwood trees were close together, and their roots wound through the ground like cords. The morning light had a hard time reaching the forest floor. At the first marked point on the map, a deputy drove his spade into the ground. The ground was softer than expected, with a layer of loose dirt giving way to a heavier, paler layer below. As soon as the blade hit the pale soil, the sharp smell of lime rose to the surface. Within minutes, the spade's edge hit cloth. The men worked more carefully, loosening the ground until a small bundle with a canvas wrap tied tightly at both ends came out. The bundle was put on a tarp, but it was too light to be alive. Each bundle was about the same size, though some were bigger and some were so small it broke my heart. There were faint shapes of toys and books pressed against the fabric. Evelyn moved between the dig sites with her camera, taking pictures of each numbered stake before the ground was dug up and again as the bundles were taken out. The glass plates caught every detail, like the rough weave of the canvas, the knots in the twine, and the way the lime had turned the fabric. 21 bundles had been found by the 3rd day. They were arranged in 2 neat rows at the edge of the grove, with the number stake next to each one. Sheriff Trumbull stood and looked over them, his hat slowly twisting on his head. One deputy kneeled by the last open grave and brushed away dirt from a small object half buried in the corner. It was the same toy Evelyn had seen in the burlap bag in Harlan's loft, and took a picture of it. The body was found exactly where it had been found, connecting the grove to the Whitlock house. When the last grave was filled in again, this time without any secrets, Trumbull said quietly, "Get them to the coroner." Everyone then spoke louder so that Harlan, Prudence, Cora, and Miriam could hear from where they were being guarded. "Make sure their names are carved in stone," he said. By late fall 1888, the Whitlock case had spread far beyond Dry Creek. Reporters from Topeka, St. Louis, and it was so crowded in the small county courthouse that people from as far away as Chicago had to wait in line to get a seat. Every morning, a line would form down the block, made up of farmers, people from the town, and strangers all hoping to catch a glimpse of the family whose name used to stand for charity. Sheriff Trumbull's evidence started the proceedings. It included Harlan's map of the grove, the ledgers and Prudence's written by Cora, and Evelyn's photographs. Each one was shown on A. The black and white images on the projection screen were so clear that they silenced the room. The glass plates showing the northern grove, the rows of canvas bundles, and the small cellar under the shed made it impossible to not believe what they saw. The prosecution called the coroner, who said that the bodies showed signs of long-term illness and malnutrition. Then the rescued children spoke, sometimes in broken English, but their words matched the records. Those who were thought to be short-term were taken away. Those kept for field rotation worked from sunrise to sunset without much food. One girl, who was only 12, said that Cora would bring water to the cellar but sometimes take a child away without giving a reason. She said that Prudence would look at them in the yard and decide who stayed and who went. The defense said that the Whitlocks were overwhelmed by the number of children and had done their best in tough frontier conditions. Harlan's lawyer painted him as a man. Miriam's lawyer said she was a victim of her husband's will and her daughter's ambitions, but when she saw her own handwriting in the ledgers, Miriam's eyes stayed on the floor. Prudence's defense did the worst. The prosecution read out loud her most blunt notes, which included entries like, "Unfit, remove and will not recover, clear space." All she did was sit rigidly in the witness chair with her lips pressed together in a hard line. Evelyn herself was called to the stand and told the jury about her first day on the farm, how she couldn't get to the fragile plants, how she spent nights watching the northern shed, and how Miriam half confessed. Her story, along with the pictures she had taken, gave the jury a story that was both visual and undeniable. After 2 days of deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Guilty on all counts. Harlan and Prudence Whitlock were sentenced to hang, and Miriam and Cora Whitlock were given life sentences. As the judge read the sentences, the defendants didn't say anything. Instead, there was a cold, impenetrable silence, as if the words themselves couldn't reach them. The sentences were carried out quickly for the frontier. On a cold January morning in 1889, Harlan and Prudence Whitlock were hanged at the state prison in Topeka. Witnesses said Harlan stayed stone-faced until the end and didn't say anything. When asked if she had anything to say, Prudence. Miriam and Ka started their life sentences at the Kansas State Women's Penitentiary. Prison records show that Miriam stopped talking almost completely and would only mutter prayers under her breath. Cora kept her cool and helped with sewing, but she never talked about the farm or the kids. Of the 14 people who were found in the cellar, many were too malnourished to be placed right away, so they were taken to facilities in Wichita. Some got better enough to be taken in by families, while others would have scars and illnesses that would last their whole lives. Some never talked about the farm again, choosing silence as the only way to stay safe. The county took back the Whitlock property because no one would buy it. In the spring of 1890, the buildings were torn down and the wood was sold for scrap. The northern grove stayed the same, partly because no one wanted to touch it. Hunters avoided the area, and travelers said it felt colder even in the summer. In the state capital, Kansas, the Whitlock case led to immediate changes. All child care facilities had to be inspected without warning. Records had to be checked for every placement, and medical records had to be kept for every child in care. Inspectors were told to talk to children alone, away from staff, so their accounts could not be skewed. Evelyn Hart's photos were used as part of the investigation, the official record. It had scary, unflinching pictures that lawmakers, social workers, and journalists would study in the future. She never took on another case involving children, but she kept a print from that case in her desk drawer. It was of the northern grove, the numbered stakes, and the morning mist curling low over the earth. She later wrote in her journal, the truth was there in the open for anyone willing to look past her smile. I just put the lens somewhere no one wanted it. The Whitlock farm for the unwanted was no longer there, but its story lived on as a lesson that bad things don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they stand in the middle of town and smile at people who are brave enough to look more closely.